Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Richard Dawson called 2020. Yeah, this has been long in coming. Alright, some context. I first became aware of Richard Dawson in 2017, like a lot of people, for his album Peasant, which got the sort of critical acclaim that prompted me to take a look at his back catalog. Hell, at some point I'm fairly certain he was added to my schedule, I just ran out of time to cover him because 2017 was like that. But I went back, I checked out his early albums, and well, I've always been a little bit uncomfortable with the term outsider artist, but especially on those early projects full of half-formed, ramshackle folk music with oblique lyrics and rather awkward singing, it did kind of feel appropriate, even within freak folk, and it wasn't my thing. Not helped by the fact that his songs and albums all ran long, but I got the impression that if things tightened up, I could get into this. And going back to Peasant now, it's got the feeling of pastoral folk music from the Middle Ages run through warped contortions both in the writing and composition, taking the odd romanticism and nostalgia to which some treat that particular era of history, and then making it as realistically grotesque as possible across the fables. Which, okay, I appreciate deconstruction and satire, and even this era of history, but I struggle to see what deeper point he was trying to make about that era, and despite slightly more conventional structures, I wasn't really loving the music enough to go in for the deep dive. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it didn't really click. So when his newest album, 2020, was proclaimed his most accessible project to date, and one moving its satire to the modern age for a lot of critical acclaim, look, I've seen a ton of people love this album, and I do like some weird freak folk weirdness, so what do we get in 2020? So this is exactly the sort of project that I'm not at all surprised that we got from Richard Dawson at this point, because it basically bumps up his deconstructive social commentary to the modern era for the shuddering, synth-accented, quaking folk music that's unmistakably British in its reference points, but just as potent and relevant worldwide. It's literate, it's textured, it's fiercely political, and even though I'd argue in the broad strokes I agree with the majority of its arc and I get what it's doing, it's not an album that I found myself really wanting to revisit. In a way, I'm reminded of albums like Pure Comedy by Father John Misty, or the longer and less tolerable work from Mark Kozelek. Sharp writing that is making a poignant point, but even if I'd argue it's easily Richard Dawson's most accessible and approachable album to date, there's something about the framing and execution that just strikes me in an odd way that I'm not sure I like as much as I want. So yeah, it's good, but I don't know if I can call this great for me. So you know what, let's start with the content, and I'll say it. I get it. To keep it simple, Richard Dawson is taking many of the ideas built upon Peasant and adjusting the framing to the uncomfortably near future, grounding everything in vividly humanistic and borderline grotesque detail to highlight the human toll of the modern age for people normally at the very bottom. But where a lot of this framing on Peasant was from the third person, a little bit more pastoral and quaint to manufacture some distance from the messy scenes on display, 2020 is almost entirely told from observations in the first person, on a project that with every song emphasizes smallness and how little power you really have. And you know what? I'll give Dawson a ton of credit in his attention to detail and showing exactly how people shudder, show real weakness, and then break in a lot of these cases. Be it the omnipresent strain of late capitalism and breaking bureaucracy, to very flawed relationships that show people trying, and mostly failing, to trust and be good to each other. And while the socially charged songs on this album are the most immediately striking, the opening track Civil Servant is a scathing indictment of the hapless staffer who has to take the calls from people who have lost their disability allowance, and Fulfillment Center does not pull any punches, thrashing into Amazon's exploitative work practices in their distribution centers. But what's more revealing are songs like The Queen's Head, a lot more of a subtle picture showing a community's pub that got flooded by slowly rising sea levels on the coast and how civil order will fracture there. A similar picture slided across the background neuroses of Jogging, and that's not to ignore the more personal stakes of songs like Two Halves, where a child's shame at a football loss on his pitch is shown opposite the overly competitive's father who's struggling to manage his emotions at the end, or on Heart Emoji showing the very messy collapse of a relationship where cheating was exposed amidst a craven mess of distrust and a lot of deeply buried anger. But it's also hard not to feel like there's more of a focus on the small-scale human ugliness and the shifting of the breaking breaking systems that likely should bear the brunt of a lot of the blame here. This is not an album that comes across as inspirational or galvanizing or anything close, where the break point for said civil servant is a desire to stay home and play Call of Duty, which is sold as though it means the world to him, but it likely won't mean much more in the long run. And that's the fatalistic side of this album's subtext that really rubs me the wrong way. A lot of creeping dread and defense mechanisms, but the running implication is that they're never going to be quite enough. The most quietly optimistic song in the text and subtext is Fresher's Ball, as a father drops his daughter off at university and now must grapple with some newfound loneliness. But you know what? He's confident that she'll be alright. They broke out of that maze together. And then after a brief interlude of unsettled ambient sound, the final song is Dead Dog in an Alleyway, where a homeless man is beaten to death by football hooligans and his body is left to bleed out until the police arrive too late. A return to barbarism to which it seems like Dawson believes we won't ever escape, given the parallels to cuts like Beggar that was on Peasant. And yes, it's evocative, it's a brutal image, but I question what that sort of deep-seated pessimism adds with no entry out of it. Because when you pair that with detail that is so precise, it can start to feel a little voyeuristic, and I start feeling like I'm watching a Larry Clark movie like Ken Park. At least when Father John Misty made pure comedy, there was a fragment of desperate romanticism to aim for something more, even despite the bleakness on display. And you can tell that Kozlek, he at least tried to cherish the smallest moments among his nihilistic pettiness on songs like I Love Portugal and Ben's My Friend. Richard Dawson, though, seems like more of a realist in stripping away any chance of aspiration, but a nihilistic wallow in despair is not something I want to revisit with any sort of frequency, and I'll admit, once you realize there isn't a lot of deeper subtext beyond that, gets a bit tedious. And you know what, while I'm still lukewarm on Richard Dawson's sound at best, that also doesn't really help either. Part of me is still his voice. It's very herky-jerky, cracking and barely on key at the best of times, and with a falsetto I just do not like that sounds both too thin and loud simultaneously. Even if he has become a better singer, it still feels like he's not particularly comfortable in that lane, which of course is part of the point on an album like this, but his refusal to play to his deeper register consistently or use more multi-tracking, it's exasperating for me. And that might as well play to a lot of the song structures as well, because the majority of these cuts are over 5 minutes, and they often spend more time shuffling through some wonky grooves, further intended to discomfort the audience rather than play to some of his best ever hooks. And of course I get why he's doing this. The entire album is about an oppressive dystopia and the smallness and ugliness of humanity, and that only will amplify that feeling, driven home the most on Fulfillment Center that's clocking over 10 minutes. But I'm going to bring back my 3 Ps for great political art, and while Dawson's got a lot of precision and can occasionally bring some real power to the best moments like the synth foundation that explodes effectively through the fractured acoustics on the Queen's head, his populist streak, it's a bit hit and miss. In the right place lyrically a lot of the time, but in execution still very much in his own freak folk comfort zone, and that won't be for everybody. And how much of this is augmented by the synths and some of the percussion choices is also kinda hit and miss. I'm not wild about how programmed the oily, clicking backdrop of Civil Servant can feel. The hollowed out flutters of synth don't really complement the pseudo-noir groove of Heart Emoji at all. And as much as I like the surprisingly heavy and pummeling grind of the guitar grooves on Jogging and Dead Dog in an Alleyway, dropping in a gummy film with wonky synthesized vocals that flattens out the bombast in the former, a lot of those vocals show up on Fulfillment Center 2 and also don't work, and then a bunch of shuddering warbles behind the latter just never allows the deeper darkness of the song to take off. Kind of a shame because the hook and especially the bass work on the song is great. Then it's a similar case for Black Triangle, already the most out-of-place song on the album thanks to its UFO paranoia disguising deeper angst in the relationship, but there's also a lingering implication that there might be some truth to all of it. You factor in what could have been a great synth-back groove that changes up multiple times before it can coalesce all that effectively, I'm just left with hearing a lot of misspent potential. Hell, when Richard Dawson gets out of his own damn way, we get songs I like Two Halves that's got a surprisingly bouncy hook that sticks remarkably well, even though I'm not a fan of football in that lane. Or the slight beauty of Fresher's Ball that's just gentle, elegant acoustics and the barest of keyboard touches around the warm percussion that builds in its organic swell really effectively, gets slightly ominous but never overtaking the song. But as a whole, Look, I've been sitting on this review for weeks now, trying to best contextualize 2020, because it's absolutely a project I can respect, and will pick up an audience for which the off-kilter sound and cutting lyrics will resonate more. But between the interminable length, the frustrating miasma, the thematic arc, and how I'm still not confident Richard Dawson is playing to his compositional strengths, I don't know, folks. It's an album that I respect a lot more than I like, which is why I'm giving it a 7 out of 10 and a recommendation, but a bit of a cautious one. This will not be for everyone. It is certainly Dawson's most accessible album in terms of sound and subject matter and hooks to date, so if you're looking for a point to get on board, this is probably it, but don't be precisely surprised if it rubs you in a weird way. It's kind of designed to do that. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know a lot of people really adore this album. I'm just kind of on the fence about it. It hits in a weird spot. Not sure I love it. But hey, if you want to buy or stream it, links down there below. And I get the poll up there for all you Richard Dawson fans to yell at me. I'm looking forward to that. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you're looking for other reviews that might be on their way, or hey, the newest episode of Billboard Breakdown, links in the card right over there. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.